The Stanley No. 5 was almost finished. 40 years of rust ground down to clean steel. My phone buzzed on the workbench. A woman named Rita Hoffman, C.P.A. from Akron. Her mother Margaret had died. Rita needed tax receipts for $43,000. Margaret donated to the Zukowski Heroes Fund. My hands went still on the plane. A charity registered in my name. 3 years of IRS Form 990s with my signature at the bottom. Rita said the fund's reported revenue was far beyond her mother's contribution. A website with my photograph and a letter I never wrote, thanking donors for supporting my battle with stage 4 cancer. I don't have cancer. Never did. Rita read me the executive director's name. Perry Zukowski. My son. Something cold locked in my chest. 3 years of donations. 3 years of my son telling the world his father was dying. The morning after Rita Hoffman's call, I stood in my garage workshop, grinding rust off a Sergeant Block plane from 1918. Same thing I did every morning. Coffee at 6. Workshop by 6:30. Hands-on steel by 7. 30 years I taught shop at Millfield High. Woodworking, metalworking, basic drafting. Kids came in not knowing which end of a chisel to hold. They left able to read grain, joint a board, build something that would outlast them. Some of those kids built careers I never could have predicted. I set the sergeant down and reached for my coffee. It had gone cold on the workbench. On the pegboard behind the mug, a photo from the 2003 shop class. I could pick out Tom Kessler in the back row, offensive lineman, bad attitude, headed nowhere good until he spent 2 semesters in my advanced woodshop and figured out he liked solving problems more than causing them. Now, he's assistant county prosecutor for Trumbull County. Dave Pulaski, class of 2006, stood in the corner of another photo beside it. Quiet kid who measured everything 3 times before cutting once. Forensic accountant now, runs his own practice at the county seat. Karen Slattery, class of 2004, told me she wanted to write for a living. I said, write about things that matter. She edits the Millfield Gazette. Hundreds of students over 3 decades, spread across town like roots under concrete. Teachers, cops, contractors, nurses. Every one of them now listed on my son's website as potential marks, though I didn't know that yet. I didn't keep score. Didn't need to. In Millfield, Ohio, population 11,000 and change, a man's name carries weight, or it doesn't. Mine carried weight. The town sits in the eastern part of the state, coal country gone quiet. Main Street runs 6 blocks with a hardware store that still smells of linseed oil and galvanized steel, a diner, the credit union where I've banked since 1986, and the Gazette office wedged between the diner and a vacant barbershop. Millfield Community Church on Elm Street, white clapboard, 200 families. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody remembers. My hands found the workbench again, palms flat on the scarred maple. The grain was smooth, where decades of use had worn it down. I pressed into it and let the wood hold my weight. I looked up at the pegboard wall. 47 restored planes, each one cleaned, sharpened, catalogued. A Stanley No. 4 from 1935. A Miller's Falls. No. 14 from 1929. The No. 5 I'd been finishing when Rita called. I could tell you the manufacturer, decade, and likely original owner of most American hand planes by how they sit in my palm. Broken things. I find them at flea markets and estate sales, seized with rust, cracked totes, pitted blades. I take them apart, clean every piece, and make them cut true again. Linda used to say it was my religion. She wasn't wrong, Linda. 37 years married. We bought this ranch house in 1989, a small single-story on a half-acre lot at the edge of town. Paid it off 15 years ago. She taught 4th grade at Millfield Elementary until her knees gave out. Then she volunteered at the library and grew tomatoes that won the county fair 3 years running. We never made much money, never needed to. We had the house, the garden, the church on Sundays, and each other. I ran my thumb along the inside of my wedding ring, turning it on my finger. The gold had worn thin at the base. I remortgaged the house in 2011 to pay for Craig's tuition at Ohio State. $87,000. He was going to study business management, going to be the first Zukowski with a degree on the wall. Linda and I sat at the kitchen table and signed the papers without hesitation. That's what parents do. Craig dropped out junior year. Something about the program not being the right fit. I didn't argue, didn't bring up the money. Not once. Linda asked me once if it bothered me. The $87,000 just sitting there like a hole in our finances. He'll find his way, I told her. Give him time. She looked at me the way she did when she thought I was being too generous. Perry, time is the one thing we can't afford to give away. She was right about that. We just didn't know how right. Craig bounced between sales jobs in Columbus after dropping out. Cell phone kiosks, car dealerships. A brief stint selling home security systems door to door. He married Denise 3 years later, a sharp-featured brunette from Toledo who worked the front desk at a dental office. First time I met her, she looked around our kitchen and her mouth tightened at the corners. She was measuring the house against something in her head, and it came up short. They rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Millfield. Craig talked about projects, opportunities, things in the pipeline. He and Denise had appetites that didn't match their income. Furniture they couldn't pay off. A leased SUV that cost more per month than our mortgage ever did. I didn't say anything. A man raises his son, sets him loose, and hopes the foundation holds. Then Linda got sick. The space heater in the corner of the garage clicked on, and for a second, the sound was the same as the IV pump in Linda's bedroom. I gripped the edge of the workbench. Pancreatic cancer. 2.5 years ago, the doctor used the word aggressive, and Linda reached for my hand under the desk. Her fingers were cold. I held them and didn't let go for a long time. Craig moved back from Columbus. Said he was coming home to help. He set up in the guest room with his laptop and his phone, and a duffel bag that stayed half unpacked on the floor for 3 months. Most days, he sat in that room with the door closed. I'd hear him talking, low and fast. I thought he was job hunting. I know better now. When he came out for dinner, he'd say he was working on something big. Your mother's in the other room, I said one evening. He was standing at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone while I heated soup for Linda. He looked up. I know, Dad. I'm here, aren't I? Being here and being present aren't the same thing. He put the phone in his pocket. What do you need me to do? Sit with her. Talk to her. She wants to hear your voice. He went in for 15 minutes. I could hear him through the wall, asking about her day, his tone bright and practiced the way he talked to strangers. Then he was back in the guest room. Door closed. I sat at Linda's bedside every day. Mornings before the workshop. Afternoons after. Evenings until she fell asleep. I read to her from the mystery novels she liked. I brought her tomato soup from the diner because she said it tasted like summer. I learned to clean the port in her chest, where the IV line went in, because the home nurse only came twice a week and Linda didn't want to go back to the hospital. One night, late, she couldn't sleep, and I sat on the edge of the bed and held the back of her neck because she said it was the only thing that stopped the nausea. My thumb against the knob of her spine. I could feel every vertebra. That was the night I understood she wasn't getting better. 7 months. That's how long it took. 7 months of watching the woman I'd loved since I was 26 disappear, 1 pound at a time. The cancer ate through her like acid through balsa wood. By the end, she weighed 93 pounds, and her hand in mine was just knuckles and skin, no grip left. She died on a Tuesday, 18 months ago. March. The weight of that morning settled in my shoulders and never left. My back carries it still, a tightness across the upper spine that no amount of stretching works out. The body keeps its own records. I buried her at Millfield Cemetery next to the plot we'd bought together 20 years earlier. Pastor Jim Weaver, who'd led our congregation for 2 decades, gave the service. Half the town came. Craig stood beside me in a suit I'd never seen before, and Denise wore sunglasses indoors. After the funeral, I fell into a routine. Workshop mornings, church Sundays, vegetable garden when the weather allowed, volunteer fire department meetings on the 2nd and 4th Thursdays, same as I'd done for 22 years. I ate dinner alone at the kitchen table with Linda's ceramic fruit bowl centered on the checkered placemat where she'd left it. I didn't move it. Some things you don't touch. 14 months after Linda died, Craig started visiting more often. But the charity had been running for over 2 years by then. Craig's new clothes, the newer car. I was looking at the proceeds of my own funeral. I just didn't know it. Every week he'd come, sometimes twice. He'd pull into the driveway in a car I didn't recognize, newer than anything he'd driven before. Dark blue sedan, leather seats. He'd come in, pour himself coffee from my pot, ask about the planes, ask about my health. "You feeling good, Dad? Sleeping all right?" "I'm fine, Craig. Just checking." "You look tired." "I'm 63. I look 63. He'd laugh, clap my shoulder. Tell me about his projects. Never specifics, just momentum words. Growth, traction, building something. His clothes changed too. The cheap polyester button-downs replaced by fitted quarter zips and chinos. Loafers without socks, even in October. A silver watch that caught the light every time he moved his hands, which was constant. I noticed. The same instinct that spots a cracked joint before it fails told me to look closer. But I didn't. He was my son. He was visiting. He was smiling. After 18 months of grief and silence and eating dinner alone, I took the visits at face value. Linda would have seen through it. She always read Craig better than I did. That was before Rita's call. Before the words, Zukowski Heroes Fund and Stage 4 Cancer, an executive director, rearranged everything I knew about my son. Now I sat at the kitchen table. Linda's fruit bowl 2 feet from my elbow. The linoleum floor worn into pale paths between the stove and the sink. Evening pressing into the windows, gray and cold. The laptop open, its screen the brightest thing in the room. I typed Zukowski Heroes Fund into the search bar and pressed enter. My own face loaded on the screen. A photograph Craig must have pulled from my Facebook page, the one Linda took of me at the county fair 2 summers before she got sick. I'm holding a blue ribbon for my tomatoes. I'm smiling. Below the photo, a letter. First person. My voice, or something close enough to fool anyone who didn't know me. The letter described my cancer battle, thanked donors for their generosity, talked about the strength it takes to accept help when you've spent your whole life giving it. Words I never wrote. A disease I never had. Craig was listed below the letter as executive director. His bio read, Perry's devoted son, managing his father's care. My hands went flat on the table, palms down on the cool surface. I pressed until the edges of my wedding ring bit into the wood. 3 years. Craig started this before Linda was even diagnosed. While she was still healthy, my son was already selling the story of my death. I read the fabricated treatment updates, hospital visits that didn't happen, a description of chemotherapy side effects, written with the detail of someone who'd researched it, not lived it. A progress report posted 6 weeks ago, saying the experimental treatment showed promise. I read every page. The way I used to read a student's project submission when something was off. But I couldn't find the seam yet. Top to bottom, left to right, clicking through navigation tabs, donation links, contact forms. Craig had built the whole thing. Or Denise had. Professional design. Clean enough that a woman like Margaret Hoffman trusted it with $43,000. I closed the laptop. The kitchen went dim. Just the refrigerator humming and the last gray light through the window above the sink. Linda's fruit bowl sat where it always sat. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse ticking slow and hard in my throat. Then I opened the laptop again. Something pulled me back, the same instinct that makes you check a joint one more time before you trust it with weight. I clicked the donor testimonials page. Names loaded in a column. Each one followed by a quote about what Perry Zukowski meant to them, what his fight inspired in their own lives. I recognized every name. Church members, former colleagues from the school district, neighbors from Elm Street and Maple Street, and the houses I'd helped wire over the years. At the top of the list, the largest individual gift, sat my sister Janet's name. $28,000. If you've ever been underestimated, subscribe, because YouTube only shows you what you tell it you want. Tell me, what do you think I did next? Monday morning, I drove to Millfield Community Church. The parking lot was empty, except for the secretary's Buick and a scattering of brown oak leaves that skittered across the asphalt in the wind. I parked near the side entrance and sat for a moment with the engine off. The white clapboard siding needed paint at the corners. I'd noticed that last spring and told Pastor Weaver I'd help scrape and prime it when the weather turned. Never got around to it. The fellowship hall was unlocked. Low ceiling, folding tables draped in checkered vinyl. 2 stainless steel coffee urns on the side counter. The fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead with that particular 60-cycle hum I'd heard in 1,000 classrooms. The cork bulletin board covered most of the back wall, layered deep with sign-up sheets, potluck announcements, a flyer for the youth group car wash. I started at the top left corner and worked my way across. Behind a notice about the Thanksgiving food drive, tucked under a sheet advertising choir practice, I found it. My face. The county fair photo, same as the website. Below it, a QR code. Below that, in clean 14-point type, the Zukowski Heroes Fund, supporting Perry in his fight. The poster was faded at the edges, sun-bleached. It had been hanging here long enough for the paper to curl and the tape to yellow. I pulled it from the board. The thumbtacks came free with small pops. I folded the poster twice and put it in my jacket pocket. My hands were still. The same hands that stripped insulation and set planes. No shake. Not yet. The secretary was in the front office when I passed through the narthex. She looked up from her computer. "Morning, Perry. Can I help you with something?" "Just checking the bulletin board." "Thank you, Dorothy. You're looking well. We've been praying for you." I stopped in the doorway. Turned back. "Praying for what?" Her face softened. "Health, of course. Craig asked us to keep you in the prayer chain." "I appreciate that," I said. My throat tightened around the words. I walked to the truck and drove 3 blocks to Main Street. The Millfield Credit Union sat in its red brick building between the hardware store and the dry cleaner. I'd walked through that glass front door with the vinyl-lettered hours every month since 1986. Opened my first joint account here with Linda the year we bought the house. The branch manager, a man named Phil Drucker, had processed our mortgage payoff 15 years ago and shook my hand across his desk. Phil was in his glass-walled office when I came in. He saw me through the partition, and his face did something I'd never seen before. His eyes dropped to his desk. His hand moved to a stack of folders and rearranged them for no reason. "Phil," I said from the doorway. "Got a minute?" "Perry." "Sure, come in." He stood, but didn't offer his hand. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. The office was barely big enough for the two of us. A filing cabinet pressed against the wall. The fluorescent tube above his head buzzed with a faint flicker. I sat down and set my hands on my knees. I need to ask you about accounts in my name. Anything I didn't open myself. Phil's jaw worked. He looked at his computer screen, then back at me. What do you mean? I mean accounts I don't recognize. Anything opened in the last 2 years that I didn't walk in here and sign for. He was quiet. Then he turned to his keyboard and typed. The screen reflected in his glasses. I watched his expression change. Perry, your son filed power of attorney documents 18 months ago. They bear your signature. 18 months, right after Linda's funeral. The charity website had been running for 3 years by then. Craig had started it while Linda was still healthy. But the forged documents, the identity theft that came later, Craig had escalated when he moved back home to help with Linda. Used the cover of grief to dig deeper. I didn't sign any power of attorney. Phil's face went pale. The documents were notarized. We processed them according to standard procedure. Show me the signature. He turned the monitor toward me. I leaned forward and looked at the scanned document. The signature at the bottom was close. Good enough to fool someone who handled 100 forms a week. But the Z was wrong. I'd been signing my name the same way since high school. Craig had never watched me close enough to get the Z right. That's not my hand, I said. Phil pulled the monitor back. His fingers gripped the edge of his desk. Perry, I don't know what to say. We trusted the documentation. You trusted the name. He didn't argue. What accounts were opened under this authority? I asked. Phil typed again. His voice dropped. A checking account under an EIN. Zukowski Heroes Fund. And 3 credit cards. Something cold moved through my chest. The same feeling as stepping into an unheated room in January. Credit cards. In your social security number. 3 cards. Combined limit of $45,000. He paused. The statements are routed to a different address. Craig's apartment. Phil nodded without looking at me. How much has been charged? He scrolled. 31,000. Give or take. I sat with that number for a moment. $31,000 charged to cards I never applied for, using my social security number, authorized by a forged power of attorney. All processed because the Zukowski name had been good in this town for 30 years. I'll need copies of everything, I said. The POA documents, the account statements, the credit card applications. Perry, I'm going to have to involve our compliance department. Do what you need to do. I'll be back for the copies. I stood. Phil stayed seated, his hand flat on the desk, palm down. He looked like a man who wanted to apologize, but couldn't find the words that would be enough. You couldn't have known, I said. Not because I believed it, because there was nothing to gain from making Phil Drucker my enemy. I sat in my truck in the credit union parking lot for 3 minutes. The steering wheel was cold under my hands. I gripped it until my knuckles went white and the leather creaked. Through the windshield, Main Street looked the same as it had every Monday morning for 40 years. The hardware store, the diner, a woman walking a dog past the Gazette office. A normal town on a normal day. I loosened my grip, turned the key, drove home. Janet picked up on the 3rd ring. Perry? Everything all right? My sister Janet, 67, retired school librarian, widowed since 2014. She lived 3 blocks from me on Maple Street in the bungalow she and her husband bought in 1990. She'd spent 30 years organizing books and reading to children and putting away enough in her teacher retirement savings to live modestly but without worry. I stood in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear and Linda's ceramic fruit bowl 2 feet from my elbow. Janet, I need to ask you about the $28,000 you gave to the Zukowski Heroes Fund. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. Oh, Perry, her voice cracked. I didn't want you to find out about that. Craig said you'd be upset. Tell me what happened. It's just, he said you were too proud to accept help. He said the treatments were expensive and you wouldn't talk about it. He said, if I gave to the fund, you'd never have to know. Tell me how he asked you. She started crying. Not the quiet kind. The kind that comes from deep in the chest, from a place that's been holding something too heavy for too long. He came to my house, she said between sobs. He sat at my kitchen table and held my hand and told me about the chemotherapy schedule. Every 2 weeks. Side effects. The nausea. The fatigue. He said you were losing weight. He cried. Perry. My nephew sat across from me and cried. And you took an early withdrawal from your retirement account. The penalty was, I don't even remember, 7%. Something like that. But Perry, Craig said, the new treatments were working. He said you were getting better. I closed my eyes. Behind my lids, I could see that kitchen table, the one with the faded sunflower wallpaper behind it. I could see Craig sitting there, his face arranged in practiced grief, his soft hands wrapped around Janet's while she wrote a check for $28,000 of her retirement. Janet, listen to me. I need you to hear what I'm about to say. She sniffled. What is it? I don't have cancer. I've never had cancer. There is no chemotherapy schedule. Craig made the entire thing up. Silence, not the brief kind. Not a pause while someone gathers their thoughts. 11 seconds. I counted them against the tick of the kitchen clock above the stove. 11 seconds of nothing. Then Janet whispered, No, he wouldn't. He did. Perry, you've been. Since Linda died, you haven't been yourself. Craig told me you've been confused. Forgetting things. He said the doctor was worried about. I'm not confused, Janet. Maybe you don't remember the diagnosis. Maybe the stress. I don't have cancer. I never had cancer. There is no fund. Craig created a charity in my name, put my photo on a website, forged my signature on IRS documents, and collected money from people who trusted our family. Her breathing changed, short and fast. That's Perry. That's a terrible thing to say about your own son. It's the truth. You sound paranoid. You sound exactly like Craig said you. She stopped herself. But I'd heard enough. Like Craig said, I what? Nothing. I didn't mean... What did Craig tell you about me, Janet? He told me you were having episodes. Since Linda. Making accusations, seeing conspiracies. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That the grief had done something to your mind. The phone was warm against my ear. The kitchen was cold. Linda's fruit bowl sat on the table, centered on the checkered placemat. The same table where I'd sat every morning for 35 years. I wasn't confused. I wasn't paranoid. I was standing in my own kitchen, listening to my sister choose my son's lie over my word. I'm going to prove it, I said. Perry, please, just talk to Craig. Work this out as a family. I'll call you when I have proof. I hung up, set the phone on the counter, pressed my palms flat on the table, and leaned into them until the edge of my wedding ring bit into the wood. My own sister. $28,000 of her retirement gone. And when I told her the truth, she called me paranoid. I drove to the Millfield Police Station on 2nd Street. A cinder block building shared with the water department. 1 story, flat roof, an American flag on a steel pole that clanked in the November wind. Inside, a desk sergeant sat behind a plexiglass partition, 2 metal desks, a wall-mounted radio scanner, a corkboard with wanted flyers, and a shift calendar. Help you? The sergeant asked. I need to file a report. My son opened a fraudulent charity in my name, forged my signature on legal documents, and stole from people using a fake cancer diagnosis. The sergeant pulled a half-sheet form from a drawer. Not a full page. A half-sheet. He uncapped a pen. Your name? Perry Zukowski. He wrote it down. And the person you're reporting? Craig Zukowski, my son. The pen slowed. The sergeant looked up. Your son. That's right. And you're saying he started a charity? The sergeant's tone shifted. Careful now. The way people talk when they think they're dealing with someone fragile. A fraudulent charity. In my name. Claiming I have cancer. Do you have cancer, Mr. Zukowski? No. And your son set up this fund without your knowledge. He forged power of attorney documents, opened credit cards in my social security number, collected donations from church members, from my own sister. The sergeant finished writing. He set the pen down and folded his hands on the counter. Mr. Zukowski, I'm going to be honest with you. This sounds like it might be a family misunderstanding. These things happen, especially when somebody's trying to help and the communication gets crossed. The communication didn't get crossed. My signature was forged. Have you talked to your son about this? Not yet. I'd suggest starting there. Family situations like this, they tend to work themselves out better when folks talk directly instead of going through official channels. He pushed the half-sheet toward me. I'll keep this on file. But my advice? Have a conversation with your boy first. I looked at the half-sheet. One side of a single piece of paper. 4 years of stolen identity. $250,000 in fraud. My sister's retirement. My name and face used to milk a town that trusted me. And it fit on a half-sheet form the sergeant would file in a cabinet and never look at again. Thank you for your time, I said. I drove home. The failure of that conversation sat in my chest like a stone dropped into cold water. No ripples, just weight, settling. The workshop was dark when I flipped the fluorescent lights on. They buzzed and flickered and caught the pegboard wall of planes, the scarred maple workbench, the space heater in the corner, clicking on with its orange glow. I picked up the Stanley No. 5, the one I'd been finishing when Rita called. The blade was sharp now, the tote repaired, the frog adjusted. A broken thing made right. I turned it in my hands. The steel was cold and clean. I thought about calling Craig. I picked up my phone and scrolled to his name. My thumb hovered over the green button. One tap. One conversation. I could confront him right now. Demand answers. Tell him I knew everything. But I didn't know everything. That was the problem. I knew about the charity website, the forged POA, the credit cards, Janet's $28,000, but I didn't know the total. Didn't know how many people Craig had taken money from. Didn't know what else he'd built on my name that I hadn't found yet. If I called now, he'd know I was looking. And Craig, who'd built a 3-year fraud, who'd forged my signature, who'd sat at his aunt's kitchen table and cried on cue while she liquidated her retirement. Craig would cover his tracks. Delete the website. Close the accounts. Feed Janet. More stories about my confusion. And I'd be left with a half-sheet police report and my sister's pity. I set the phone down on the workbench, picked up the No. 5 again. Ran my thumb along the blade's edge. Not yet. Not like this. I opened the laptop and went back to the charity website. Bottom of the donation page, below the PayPal button, a link I'd missed the first time. Small blue text, easy to scroll past. GoFundMe. I clicked it. The page loaded. A banner photo. My county fair picture again. The blue ribbon. The smile Linda captured 2 summers before she got sick. Below it, a fundraising thermometer filled to $94,000. Below that, a list of donors so long I had to scroll for 30 seconds to reach the bottom. 94,000. From this single platform alone, the charity website had listed testimonials, curated quotes, names I recognized, brief endorsements. But this was different. This was raw. Dollar amounts attached to every name. The scale of it spread across the screen like a wound. The most recent update had been posted 6 weeks ago. I read it, a description of my experimental treatment at a hospital in Cleveland. Details about side effects, fatigue, appetite loss, joint pain, written with the specificity of someone who'd done research, not someone who'd lived it. The update thanked the community for their prayers and said the doctors were cautiously optimistic. I checked the date, October 3rd. On October 3rd, I was in my garage restoring a Miller's Falls jack plane. I ate leftover pot roast for dinner and watched the Indians game. I wasn't in Cleveland. I wasn't in a hospital. I was sharpening a blade and drinking black coffee. The writing in that update was polished. Careful sentence structure. A rhythm to it. Short paragraphs, emotional hooks, a line at the end asking for more donations, worded the way ads are worded. Earlier updates were rougher, choppier. Craig's voice, clumsy and blunt. But sometime around June, the quality jumped. Someone else was writing these, or coaching him. I scrolled through the donor comments. The website testimonials had been selected, polished. This list was everyone. Pat Keller from Elm Street, who brought me a casserole after Linda died. $200. Bill and Sandra Roth, my neighbors for 15 years. $500. Jean Morrison, who I'd served with on the volunteer fire department for 2 decades. $300. One donor left just a number. $75. No comment. No name I recognized. A stranger somewhere in the county who'd heard about a dying man and reached into their wallet. Then I found Diane, a former colleague at the high school, a woman who taught English in the room across the hall from my shop for 20 years. She wrote that she'd donated her anniversary dinner savings because she couldn't bear losing the best teacher Millfield ever had. I looked at the share count. 847. My fictional cancer diagnosis had spread across the county to people I would never meet. People who would never know the man they grieved for was sitting in his garage with a sharp plane and a strong pulse. I looked up at Linda's wedding portrait above the workbench. She was 28 in that photo, dark hair, brown eyes, a smile that started slow and got bigger. She would have seen through Craig months ago. Years ago, she read him better than I ever let myself. I scrolled past the $94,000 total, past the donor list, past the 847 shares, all the way to the bottom. A comment from Pastor Jim Weaver, dated 8 months ago. It thanked Craig for his devotion to his dying father and called the Zukowski family an example of faith under trial. Beside it, a donation of $5,000 from the Millfield Community Church Discretionary Fund. Pastor Weaver's $5,000 from the Church Discretionary Fund. I sat with that number for a long time after I closed the laptop. $5,000 of congregation money, given to my son on the strength of my name. I thought about every Sunday I'd sat in that pew, every potluck I'd helped set up, every handshake in the fellowship hall. Craig had turned all of it into revenue. 2 weeks I spent at the workbench after that. Not with planes, with paper. I printed every page of the Zukowski Heroes Fund website, every GoFundMe update, every donor comment. I used Linda's old inkjet printer, the one that pulled pages crooked and smelled of hot toner, and I fed it until the black cartridge ran dry and I drove to the hardware store for a replacement. The legal pad came from a pack of 3 I kept in the kitchen drawer. Yellow, college-ruled, the kind I used for lesson plans for 30 years. I started a timeline. Top of the first page, October 2021, charity registered. I worked forward from there. Dates I could confirm from the website's cached posts. Dollar amounts from the GoFundMe page. Names from the donor comments. 19 I could match with specific dollar amounts and dates, though I recognized many more. Church members, former colleagues, Neighbors who'd brought casseroles after Linda died, and them, apparently, wrote checks to help me die too. I logged each name on its own line. Next to it, the amount they gave and the date, if I could find it. Next to that, what Craig had told them. I didn't know those details yet for most of them. But I left space. A good teacher leaves space for answers that haven't arrived. On the second Monday, I drove 40 minutes to the county seat. A lawyer named Garrett Webb, whose name I pulled from the phone book at the Millfield Library because I wanted someone outside town. Someone Craig hadn't spoken to. Someone who didn't know the Zukowski name. Webb's office sat above a dry cleaner on 3rd Street. He was younger than I expected. Mid-30s, thin tie. I spread my printouts across his desk. The charity website. The GoFundMe page. The forged power of attorney from the credit union. The credit card statements Phil Drucker had copied for me. Webb read through them without speaking, turning pages with the eraser end of a pencil. "You have a case," he said. "The forged signatures alone are criminal. What would it take to prosecute? Charity fraud is complex. You'd need a forensic accountant to trace every dollar. Map the flow from donors to the fund to your son's personal accounts. That's the backbone of any prosecution. Cost? Forensic accounting alone, $20,000 to $40,000. Legal fees on top of that. Civil suit, 2 years minimum. Criminal referral through the county prosecutor's office might move faster, but they'd still need the financial trail. $40,000. I didn't have it. The house was paid off, but the remortgage for Craig's tuition had eaten through our savings, and Linda's medical bills took the rest. My Social Security and the odd repair jobs kept the lights on. That was it. "There's another option," Webb said. "Family mediation. Sit down with your son, a neutral third party, work out restitution without the courts." Second time, someone told me to talk to Craig, the desk sergeant, and now the lawyer. Everyone wanted me to sit across from my son and have a conversation as if this were a billing dispute with the cable company. "Thank you for your time," I said. I gathered my printouts. "I appreciate the clarity. Mr. Zukowski, I'd strongly recommend. You've been helpful. I'll be in touch if I need to." I drove home with the printouts on the passenger seat, and Webb's estimate sitting in my chest like a nail driven into green wood. $40,000, the same amount Craig had taken from me in credit cards I never applied for. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone. The decision had been forming for days, the way a crack forms in wood, invisible at first, then a line, then a split. I needed to see Craig's face when I asked. Not because I expected the truth, because a man's face when he lies tells you how long he's been practicing. I called Craig. "Hey, Dad. Everything good. Come by tomorrow. I want to go over some of Linda's estate paperwork." Sure. What time works?" 2 o'clock. "I'll be there. Want me to bring anything? Coffee? Those Danishes you like from? Just yourself." He arrived at 2:15. The dark blue sedan pulled into the driveway, and Craig got out wearing a quarter-zip pullover, the color of money, and chinos without a crease. Loafers. No socks, even in November. He walked up the front steps with the loose, rolling stride of a man who owned things. I had coffee ready. 2 mugs on the kitchen table, Linda's fruit bowl between them. The kitchen smelled of the pot I'd brewed 10 minutes earlier. Dark roast, the same brand Linda bought for 20 years. I sat in my usual chair. The one facing the door, the one that let me see whoever walked in. The same chair I'd sat in for 35 years of dinners. Craig came through the kitchen door, saw the mugs, smiled. 2 o'clock coffee. Just like the old days. He sat down, pulled his mug toward him, took a sip. "So what's going on with Mom's paperwork?" "I don't have estate paperwork for you." His mug stopped halfway to the table. "Okay. What's this about? What is the Zukowski Heroes Fund?" I watched his face the way I used to watch a student's hands when they claimed they hadn't touched the table saw after hours. Not the mouth, not the words, the space behind the performance. Craig laughed, light, easy. He leaned back in his chair and set his mug down. Dad, that's the memorial fund we talked about. For Mom. Don't you remember? For Mom. But the website described my cancer, not Linda's memory. He couldn't even keep his own lies sorted. We never talked about any fund. We did, right here at this table. He gestured at the surface between us, palm up, open. After the funeral. You said you wanted something in Mom's memory. I set it up, in my name, with my photograph, describing my cancer treatment. It's a tribute site, Dad. We talked about this. I don't have cancer, Craig. I know that. His voice dropped, gentle now. Concerned. That's what I'm worried about. You signed the papers yourself. At the credit union. Phil Drucker was right there. I went to the credit union last week. I saw the power of attorney documents on file. The signature isn't mine. 1 second. That's all it took. 1 second, where his eyes changed. The warmth drained out like water from a cracked basin, and what sat behind it was flat and still and cold. The pale blue irises went hard as glass, and in that single second I saw my son for what he was. Then the mask came back. Smooth and warm and worried. Dad, I'm worried about you. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You've been forgetting things since Mom died. Everyone's noticed. Everyone. Janet called me last week. She said you were confused on the phone, making accusations. He shook his head, slow, pained. The grief. It does things to people, Dad. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I'm not confused. You just told me you don't remember signing papers that you signed in person. At the bank. With witnesses. He spread his hands. What does that sound like to you? I didn't answer. I watched him. The way the concern sat on his face, like a coat he'd put on before walking through the door. The way his hands moved. Open palms, soft gestures. The body language of someone performing care. This paranoia, Craig said, it's not healthy. You need to see someone. Talk to Dr. Reeves. Get an evaluation. I'd like you to leave now. He stood. Slowly. He came around the table and put his hand on my shoulder. Warm palm, soft fingers. The hand of a man who'd never held a tool. I love you, Dad. I'm just trying to help. He squeezed once. Think about what I said. Please. He walked out. The screen door clapped shut behind him. The sedan backed out of the driveway and turned left toward the edge of town. I sat at the kitchen table in the silence. Linda's fruit bowl. The 2 coffee mugs, his barely touched. The kitchen clock ticking above the stove. Craig hadn't been surprised by my question. He'd been ready for it. That 1 second shift, the flat calculation behind the warmth, was the tell. I'd seen 1,000 students lie about homework and broken equipment. I knew what a rehearsed defense looked like. 3 days later, the doorbell rang at 8:15 in the morning. November cold pressed through the glass storm door. My breath would have been visible if I'd been standing outside. A woman on my porch. Mid-40s, brown coat, clipboard in the crook of her arm. County ID badge on a lanyard. Mr. Zukowski? I'm Sharon Medina from Adult Protective Services. Do you have a few minutes? My hand tightened on the doorframe. What's this about? We received a welfare complaint. Someone expressed concern about your ability to manage your daily affairs. She glanced at her clipboard. The complainant cited cognitive decline, paranoid behavior, and difficulty with financial management. Who filed the complaint? The report was filed anonymously. I can't disclose the source. She paused, then glanced at her clipboard again. The complainant indicated concern about a parent's well-being. A parent's well-being, not a neighbor's, not a friend's. Parents. Come in, I said. She wiped her shoes on the mat and followed me through the living room. I watched her eyes move across the space. The swept hardwood floors. The dusted shelves. Linda's books organized by author on the built-in case. The kitchen, dishes washed, counters clean, the fruit bowl centered. You keep a very tidy home, Mr. Zukowski. My wife taught me well. She sat at the kitchen table, Craig's chair, the one facing away from the door, and opened her clipboard. I need to ask you some standard questions. What is today's date? November 14th, 2024. Who is the current president? I told her. Can you describe your typical daily routine? I wake at 5:30. Coffee by 6. I work in my garage workshop most mornings. I restore antique hand planes. Lunch, around noon. Afternoons, I handle household maintenance or run errands. I attend Millfield Community Church every Sunday and volunteer fire department meetings on the second and fourth Thursday of each month. I eat dinner at 6. I read until 9. I sleep, Sharon Medina wrote. Her pen moved in quick, neat strokes. She looked up. Can you tell me about your financial situation? Do you manage your own accounts? I bank at Millfield Credit Union. Have since 1986. I pay my bills on time. My mortgage is paid off. I live on Social Security and income from electrical repair work. Has anyone recently helped you manage your finances? Power of attorney. Shared accounts. Not with my knowledge or consent. She studied me. I held her gaze. The fluorescent light in the kitchen hummed, the same 60-cycle hum as 100 classrooms. Mr. Zukowski, I want to be direct with you. You appear lucid. Your home is well maintained. Your answers are precise and consistent. She closed the clipboard. I'm required to file a report regardless. The complaint triggers a mandatory review. But my assessment will reflect what I've observed here today. I understand. Is there anything else you'd like me to note? Note that I'm 63 years old. I live alone. I maintain my home and my workshop, and I am not confused about anything. I paused, including who filed this complaint. She stood, shook my hand. Professional grip, quick release. She walked to the door, and I followed her out onto the porch. The November air hit my face, raw, biting, the kind of cold that sits in your sinuses and doesn't leave. Frost covered the lawn in a white film that would burn off by 10. The oak tree at the corner of the lot was stripped bare, branches black against a gray sky. Sharon Medina walked to her county sedan, got in, and drove away. I stood on the porch. My hands hung at my sides. Then they started shaking. Not from the cold I could handle. 22 years of volunteer firefighting in Ohio winters. I'd stood in worse than this. The shaking came from somewhere deeper, from the place in my chest where the realization was forming, piece by piece, the way a crack spreads through a stressed joint until the whole thing gives. Craig hadn't just stolen money. He hadn't just forged my name and lied to my sister and milked a church congregation. He built a defense. Before I ever found the charity website, before Rita Hoffman called, before I asked a single question. The APS complaint. The conversations with Janet about my confusion. The gentle concern at the kitchen table. Dad, you've been forgetting things. The suggestion, I see a doctor. Every piece of it was architecture. Load-bearing walls in a structure designed to hold one story. If I'd gone to the police with accusations, if I'd called the county prosecutor, if I'd confronted Craig publicly, the defense was already in place. A paper trail of concern. An APS report. A sister who'd testify her brother had been paranoid and confused since his wife died. Bank documents, with signatures close enough to mine that a judge might squint and call them genuine. Craig hadn't panicked when I asked about the fund. He'd been ready. He'd been ready for months. My hands wouldn't stop. I pressed them against the porch railing, the wood cold and rough under my palms, and gripped until the shaking transferred into the grain. Heat crawled up the back of my neck, despite the November air. My jaw set so tight, my teeth ached. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Scrolled to the Trumbull County Prosecutor's office. My thumb hovered over the green button. One tap, one call. I could report everything right now. The forged POA, the credit cards, the stolen donations, the charity website. Let the system handle it. But the system had already been handled. A desk sergeant who called it a family misunderstanding. A lawyer who suggested mediation. And now an APS file with my name on it. A file that would follow any accusation I made, like a shadow, whispering that the accuser was confused. Declining, not reliable. That's what Craig was counting on. A panicked old man making wild accusations that could be explained away by a loving son's concerns about his father's mental state. I put the phone back in my pocket, stood on the porch for another 30 seconds, breathing the cold air until my pulse slowed. Then I walked inside, through the kitchen, through the back door, and into the garage. The workshop was cold. I flipped the fluorescent lights on. They buzzed and caught. I turned on the space heater and waited for the orange glow to spread. Then I picked up the Stanley No. 5, finished now, the blade sharp enough to shave paper. And I picked up the whetstone and began to sharpen it again. Not because it needed it, because the rhythm of steel on stone was the only thing that would turn the heat in my neck into something I could use. 30 minutes. 40. The blade sang against the stone. My hands steadied. The shaking stopped. I wasn't going to give Craig the confused old man he built paperwork to create. I was going to give him something he hadn't prepared for. That evening, I drove past Craig's apartment on the way back from the hardware store. Ground floor unit. Through the window. Warm light, the kitchen table visible, Craig and Denise sitting across from each other. Denise's laptop was open between them. Craig said something, and Denise laughed, her head tipping back, her hand reaching across to touch his arm. They looked comfortable, happy. Two people enjoying an evening at home, funded by my sister's retirement savings and a town's trust. I watched for 3 seconds. Then I drove. Back at the house, I went straight to the garage. On the shelf above the workbench, behind a row of woodworking manuals, I found what I needed. A white 3-inch 3-ring binder, unused, still in the plastic wrap from the office supply store. I tore the plastic off. The binder cracked open, stiff and new. I uncapped a black marker. The felt tip squeaked against the spine label as I pressed it down and wrote in block letters, Craig. I set the binder on the workbench under the fluorescent light. The white cover caught the glare. I opened it and laid in tab dividers from a pack in the desk drawer. Red tabs for financial records, blue for forged documents, green for website screenshots, yellow for witness statements. The legal pad from the past 2 weeks went in first, behind the yellow tab. Every name, every date, every dollar I'd traced so far. Then the printouts. Charity website pages, GoFundMe screenshots, the credit union documents Phil had copied. Each page slid into its section with the precision of 30 years of organized lesson plans. I kept the binder behind the Stanley No. 5 on the pegboard shelf. Out of sight if Craig visited. Not hidden, just not displayed. The difference matters when you're the one being watched. The binder sat on the workbench next to the hand planes. White spine, black letters, clean and square. It looked like what it was. A file. A case. A teacher's project. I opened it to a fresh page in the yellow section and picked up a pen. I wrote one line. A phone number, committed to memory 20 years ago and never forgotten. Tom Kessler. Class of 2003. I called Tom Kessler at 7 the next morning. The workshop phone, wall-mounted, cord stretched to its limit. His secretary put me through. Tom picked up on the second ring. Mr. Z, not Perry, not Zukowski. Mr. Z, the same thing every student called me for 30 years. Tom, I need your help. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you respond. Go ahead, I told him. The charity, the forged signatures, the credit cards in my social security number, Janet's 28,000, the GoFundMe at 94,000, the APS complaint, Craig's kitchen table performance, the police station, and the half-sheet form. I talked for 4 minutes without stopping, my voice even, my hand flat on the workbench. Tom didn't interrupt. Not once. I could hear his breathing on the line, steady, controlled, the way a man breathes when he's already working. When I finished, the silence lasted 3 seconds. Mr. Z, I've been waiting 20 years to pay you back. Pause. Give me everything you have. He was at the house by noon. I'd spread the evidence across the workbench. Printouts of the charity website, GoFundMe screenshots, the credit union documents, my handwritten timeline on yellow legal pad pages, the church poster I'd pulled from the bulletin board. Tom stood on the other side of the bench and photographed every page with his phone. No wasted motion. He held each document flat with his left hand, shot with his right, moved to the next. The forged power of attorney is your strongest lead, he said, turning the credit union copy toward the fluorescent light. Criminal forgery under the Ohio Revised Code. Each document is a separate count. What can you do from your office? Open a criminal investigation. Subpoena bank records, the Columbus account, the personal checking, the credit card statements, phone records, text messages. I can coordinate with the State Attorney General's Charitable Trust Division to shut down the fund and initiate restitution. He set the document down. But I need a forensic financial trail before any of that moves. The donations have to be traced from source through charity to Craig's personal accounts, dollar by dollar. A jury needs to see the flow. I went to a lawyer in the county seat. He quoted me $40,000 for forensic accounting. Tom looked up from the workbench. You know anyone who does that kind of work? I was going to ask you. He smiled. First time since he'd walked in, Dave Pulaski, class of 2006. Best forensic accountant in the county. Runs his own practice. The quiet kid who measured everything 3 times. That's the one. But I should warn you, if Dave's name shows up on subpoena requests, Craig might figure out someone local is digging. We'd need to move fast once the paper trail starts. Tom called Dave from my workshop. I listened to one side of the conversation. Tom's voice was clipped, factual. No editorializing. He laid out the scope, the scale, the urgency. Then he handed me the phone. Mr. Z? Dave's voice was the same as I remembered. Low, careful, every word weighed before it left his mouth. Dave, I need help, Tom told me. A pause. Mr. Z, if your son finds out I'm involved before the case is airtight, it could complicate things, legally and otherwise. I understand the risk. I'll be there Wednesday. I can't pay your standard rate. You won't pay anything. Wednesday at 4, have everything ready. He hung up. I stood with the dead phone against my ear for a moment, then placed it back on the wall mount. My throat was tight. Something had shifted in my chest. Not grief, not relief. The feeling of a joint you tested 100 times, finally holding weight. Tom filed the paperwork that afternoon. By end of week, the county prosecutor's office had an open case number. Dave Pulaski arrived at the garage workshop 2 days later, carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than he was. 36 years old, lean, wire-rimmed glasses, not unlike my own. He shook my hand with a firm, quick grip and set the briefcase on the corner of the workbench. His eyes moved across the evidence spread. Printouts, bank statements, legal pad pages, and something shifted in his expression. The same look I'd seen in my classroom when a student understood the assignment before I finished explaining it. "Walk me through the accounts," he said. No small talk. No sympathy speech. I started at the beginning. The charities, EIM, the Columbus bank account, the credit cards, the GoFundMe, the PayPal donations, the church collection, envelopes Pastor Weaver had mentioned in his endorsement. Dave took notes in a leather-bound pad with a mechanical pencil, his handwriting small and precise. When I finished, he gathered every document on the workbench into a single stack, squared the edges against the maple surface, and slid them into his briefcase. "Give me 4 days. What are you looking for?" "Everything. Every dollar in, every dollar out. Transaction dates, routing numbers, account origins. If your son moved money through 3 accounts to hide the trail, I'll map all 3. He closed the briefcase. He thought irregular transfers would avoid detection. Irregular is actually easier to trace. Patterns hide in noise. Anomalies stand out. Dave worked 4 evenings straight. On the second night, he called me from his desk at 10:30. "The transfers are irregular," he said. "That's actually good for us." He varied between 800 and 4,000 per transfer. Never the same number twice. He was trying to stay under the radar. He was waving a flag. Any auditor would have caught this in an afternoon. He never expected an auditor to look. On the 5th day, Dave came back. He set a bound report on the workbench, 46 pages, plastic comb binding, a yellow cover sheet with my name and a case number Tom had assigned. The pages were tabbed with colored flags: red for deposits, blue for transfers, green for expenditures. $287,000, Dave said. He opened the report to the first summary page. Total donations across all channels. GoFundMe, $94,000. PayPal through the website, $68,000. Direct checks mailed to the charity's P.O. Box, $41,000. Church collection envelopes, $32,000. Remaining balance from miscellaneous small donations and cash deposits Craig made in person. I gripped the edge of the workbench. The number sat in the air between us. 287,000. My name, my face, my town. From there, Dave turned to a flowchart he'd drawn by hand on graph paper. Boxes connected by arrows, each labeled with dollar amounts and dates. Craig opened a checking account at a regional bank in Columbus under the charity's EIN, using your forged signature on the application. Donations flowed in from all channels and cleared through this account. His finger traced the arrows. Then he transferred funds to his personal checking account. He and Denise share a joint account at the same Columbus bank. 240,000 moved from the charity account to the personal account over 3 years. And the rest? The remaining 47,000 sat in the charity's operating account. Website hosting fees, P.O. box rental, a few hundred a year in GoFundMe platform costs, and a cash buffer. Craig kept to maintain appearances, just enough to look legitimate if anyone ever glanced at the books. How did he move the money? Irregular amounts, never the same number twice. Never on the same day of the month. He varied between 800 and 4,000 per transfer. Dave paused. Textbook structuring, keeping amounts below thresholds that trigger automatic review. Dave turned to the expenditure section. Pages of highlighted line items, each one flagged and annotated. Here's where the money went. Furniture, financed, but the monthly payments came from the charity funds. Electronics, 2 laptops, a tablet, a 65-inch television. A vacation to Cancun. 4 nights at an all-inclusive resort. Monthly subscription services totaling $600 a month. Streaming, meal kits, a wine club, and the 3 credit cards in your social security number. How much on the cards? $31,000 in charges. Clothing, restaurant meals, gas, and auto detailing service. Craig used twice a month. Dave's voice stayed flat, but his jaw tightened. The credit card statements were routed to his apartment. You'd never have seen a bill. I looked at the flowchart. Every dollar mapped. Every transfer documented. Every lie given a number and a date and a highlighted line on a printed page. Dave closed the report and slid it toward me. Forgot who taught us to read a ruler. The report sat on the workbench between the Stanley, No. 5 and the space heater. 46 pages. 3 years of fraud reduced to a financial narrative any jury could follow. I picked up a Miller's Falls block plane from the pegboard shelf and turned it in my hands. The steel was cold and familiar. I set it back down, couldn't focus on it. Hadn't been able to focus on planes since the binder started filling up. Tom Kessler called the following Tuesday. I got the subpoena through. Craig's phone records. Text messages. The complete thread between him and Denise going back 14 months. I sat down on the shop stool. The metal seat was cold through my jeans. What did you find? You should see these in person. I'm coming over. Tom arrived with a manila folder. He sat across from me at the workbench and opened it. Printed pages of text messages, each one time-stamped and annotated in Tom's handwriting. This is from March of this year. 8 months ago. Craig to Denise, 11:47 p.m. Tom read. If he finds out, we say he started it himself and forgot. Who's going to believe a retired shop teacher over bank records? The words landed in the quiet of the garage like something dropped from a height. My hands went still on the bench. The space heater clicked and hummed. There's more, Tom said. He turned pages. June. Craig to Denise. Janet's the biggest target. She's got the retirement fund, and she loves Dad more than anyone. I'll do it in person. The crying works better face to face. My jaw locked. Heat crawled up the back of my neck, the way it does when you find a joint. Someone swore they finished, and the whole thing's rotten underneath. August. Denise to Craig, the GoFundMe update needs more emotion. Write about his appetite. People respond to appetite loss. I'll edit before you post. Tom looked up. She was coaching him, writing the updates, managing the emotional pitch. She ran the social media. All of it. The website copy, the GoFundMe updates after June, the Facebook posts. Denise handled the digital footprint. Craig handled the in-person solicitation. Tom set the folder down. There's a browser history, too. I pulled it from the phone data. What was he searching? Dementia, defense criminal case. How to file a PS complaint. Charity fraud, statute of limitations. Tom paused. All of it months before you found the website. He was building the defense before you even knew there was something to defend against. The APS filing. Premeditated. He researched it, planned it, and executed it as insurance. If you ever caught on, he'd already have the paper trail to discredit you. I pressed my palms flat on the workbench. The scarred maple was cold and smooth under my hands. My wedding ring bit against the grain. One more thing, Tom said. He pulled a single sheet from the back of the folder. Craig's phone has over 400 downloaded true crime podcast episodes. 3 of them are specifically about charity fraud cases. The schemes match his methodology. Fake medical diagnoses, sympathy donations, structured transfers to avoid detection. I stared at the sheet. 400 episodes. My son had sat in his apartment, or in my guest room while Linda was dying in the next room, and listened to stories about criminals, studied them, built his playbook from their failures, and decided he could beat the odds. He built the whole thing from podcasts, I said. Tom nodded. He studied how people get caught, and he thought he was smarter than all of them. That evening, I opened the binder and added Dave's report behind the first red divider, each page flagged with neon post-it notes at the key transfers. Tom's text message excerpts went behind the yellow tab, the browser history, the podcast list. I worked through December evenings in the garage. The space heater's orange glow barely cut the cold that seeped through the walls. My breath hung in the air some nights. I stopped to flex my fingers when the knuckles stiffened, then went back to the post-it flags. My hands placed each one with care. The neon tabs lined up along the binder's edge in precise rows, the same precision I used for 30 years of lesson plans. Each evening, the binder grew thicker. 3 inches of evidence. Every tab aligned, every flag visible. One night in mid-December, I stopped. My hands were cramped. The knuckles ached when I tried to straighten my fingers. My back had locked into a knot between my shoulder blades that wouldn't release no matter how I shifted on the stool. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting the same sharp shadows it always did. But the workbench looked different to me now. Covered in paper instead of sawdust. Evidence instead of planes. I looked up at Linda's wedding portrait above the workbench. 28 years old in that photo. Dark hair, brown eyes. The smile that started slow. 3 weeks of broken sleep. 15 pounds I hadn't meant to lose. The garden hadn't been touched since October. The vegetable beds sat under frost, untended. The last tomato stakes still standing like markers in a graveyard. The grief I should have been working through. The quiet, necessary work of learning to live without her. For the binder. For Craig. I remembered him on this workbench. 6 years old. Legs dangling, sneakers swinging above the concrete floor. Watching me restore a plane. Why do you fix old things, Dad? Because throwing something away is easy. Making it work again. That's the real skill. I closed my eyes. The workshop was silent, except for the space heater's hum and the distant sound of a truck on Route 7. This wasn't a plane with a cracked tote or a rusted blade. This was my son, and the question I'd been avoiding for 3 weeks, whether dismantling him would cost me the thing Linda loved most about me. I opened my eyes, looked at her portrait, looked at the binder. Some things can't be fixed, they can only be stopped. I picked up the binder and set it on the shelf beside the Stanley No. 5. Both finished. Both ready. Tom called the following morning while I was grinding coffee beans. His voice was direct, no preamble. Karen Slattery, class of 2004. She edits the Gazette now. I know who Karen is. She'll hold the story until we're done. After the confrontation, she publishes front page, financial records, donor interviews, Craig's photo. The online edition reaches the whole county. The case had a prosecutor, a forensic trail, a newspaper. I leaned against the kitchen counter and looked at Linda's fruit bowl on the table. I want to face him first, I said, before the arrest. I want him to see the binder. I was going to suggest the same thing. Controlled environment. Neutral location. Somewhere the family will feel comfortable, but Craig can't run. I'll park at the curb with investigators. Janet's house. Maple Street. Good choice. Her living room has a front window facing the street. When do you want to do this? Sunday. First week of January. I'll have everything in place. I called Janet that evening. She picked up on the first ring, the way she always did. Janet never let a phone go to a second ring if she could help it. Perry, is everything all right? I need to use your living room this Sunday. A family meeting. You, me, Craig, and Denise. I'm also inviting Pastor Weaver. A pause. What is this about? I have proof now, Janet. Everything I told you. The charity, the signatures, the money. All of it documented. She was quiet for a long time. Then, all right, Sunday. I'll put coffee on. Thank you, Perry. Her voice dropped. There's something I should tell you. Craig called me yesterday. He was asking about your will. My hand tightened on the phone. The plastic casing creaked under my grip. He wanted to know if you'd updated it since Linda passed. Whether you'd mentioned him specifically. He said he was asking because he wanted to make sure you were taken care of. I stood in the workshop doorway, the cold December air on my back, the binder on the shelf behind me. Through the kitchen, I could see Linda's fruit bowl on the table, catching the last light from the window. Craig wasn't just stealing from the past. He was already reaching for what came next. Sunday, I said. Tell him to be there. I hung up, set the phone on the workbench next to the binder. My hand rested on the white spine, the black letters sharp under the fluorescent light. Then I reached up and turned off the lamp. The garage went dark except for the space heater's orange glow at my feet. Sunday afternoon, early January. The sky over Maple Street sat low and gray, the color of wet concrete pressing down on the bare oaks that lined the block like black bones against it. I parked my truck 2 houses down from Janet's bungalow and sat for a moment with the engine off. The white binder was on the passenger seat, 3 inches thick, black letters on the spine. Craig. Tom Kessler's county sedan was already at the curb in front of Janet's house. 2 investigators inside. The exhaust rose in thin white vapor that disappeared against the gray sky. Through Janet's sheer front curtains, the sedan was visible. If you knew to look. I picked up the binder. The weight of it was familiar now. 46 pages of Dave Pulaski's forensic report. Tom's text message printouts. Forged documents. Website screenshots. 3 years of fraud organized with the same care I'd given 30 years of lesson plans. I walked up Janet's front steps. The concrete was cracked at the edges, the iron railing cold under my hand. I knocked once, and Janet opened the door before my knuckles left the wood. Perry. Her eyes dropped to the binder. She'd seen it before. I'd shown her 2 pages last week, enough to end her doubts. She stepped aside and let me in. The living room had Janet's late husband's La-Z-Boy recliner near the window, a worn floral sofa against the far wall, and a braided oval rug covering most of the hardwood floor. Coffee was set out on the kitchen counter, the same kitchen, the same table where Craig had held her hand and described chemotherapy that never happened. Pastor Jim Weaver stood near the kitchen doorway. 59 years old, 20 years leading Millfield Community Church. He wore a brown corduroy jacket, and his reading glasses hung from a cord around his neck. He shook my hand with both of his. Perry, I wish this were a different occasion. So do I, Jim. I sat in the La-Z-Boy. Set the binder on my lap. The vinyl cover was cool against my palms. Janet lowered herself into her armchair by the lamp, her hands twisting a tissue into a tight cord. Pastor Weaver stayed standing near the kitchen door. The room settled into a silence, broken only by the baseboard heater ticking and the muffled sound of a car passing on Maple Street. At 2:18, a dark blue sedan pulled into the driveway. 2 doors opened and closed. Footsteps on the front walk. Craig came through the door first. Quarter-zip pullover, chinos, loafers without socks. January in Ohio, and the man wore no socks. He entered the room the way he entered every room. Loud laugh, firm handshake extended to Pastor Weaver, a shoulder clap that made the older man stiffen. Pastor Weaver, good to see you. Aunt Janet. He kissed Janet's cheek. She didn't turn toward him. Denise followed, dark jeans, fitted jacket. She sat on the sofa without greeting anyone and crossed her legs. Craig turned to me. His eyes found the binder on my lap. The white cover, the black letters facing away from him, but he didn't need to read them. His smile held, but the corners tightened, a fraction of an inch. The same fraction I'd measured in 1,000 lying students. So, Craig dropped into the other end of the sofa from Denise. Family meeting. What's going on, Dad? I opened the binder to the first red tab. The IRS Form 990 was on top. Perry Zukowski listed as president. My forged signature at the bottom, circled in red Sharpie. Craig, I'm going to show everyone in this room what you've done. Then you're going to listen. Craig laughed. The same light, easy laugh he used when a conversation moved somewhere he didn't want it to go. Dad, come on. Is this the charity thing again? I told you. You signed those papers yourself. I didn't respond to that. I held up the Form 990 so everyone in the room could see it. This is the IRS Form 990 for the Zukowski Heroes Fund, filed 3 years running. It lists me as president of a charity I never heard of until 2 months ago. The signature at the bottom is forged. I've had it analyzed. I turned the page. Dave Pulaski's forensic report. The flowchart on graph paper, hand-drawn boxes connected by arrows. This is a forensic accounting report prepared by a certified forensic accountant. It maps every dollar donated to the Zukowski Heroes Fund over 3 years. $287,000 total. Craig's laugh stopped mid-breath. He shifted on the sofa. Denise's hands went still in her lap. The money came from GoFundMe, PayPal, direct checks, and church collection envelopes. I looked at Pastor Weaver. His face had lost color, including $5,000 from the Millfield Community Church discretionary fund. I turned to the expenditure page. Dave had highlighted every line item in yellow marker. $240,000 of those dollars were transferred from the charity's Columbus Bank account to the personal checking account of Craig and Denise Zukowski. The transfers were structured in irregular amounts, $800 to $4,000 per transaction, to avoid automatic detection. I kept my voice flat. The same voice 30 years of classrooms had built, measured and precise. I ran my finger down the page and read each item as it came. A 4-night vacation to Cancun, all-inclusive resort. I let that sit for a second. Then the next line, a 65-inch television, 2 laptops, a tablet. Craig's jaw worked. Denise uncrossed her legs and recrossed them the other direction. Monthly subscriptions, totaling $600. Streaming services, meal kits, a wine club. I looked up from the page and held Craig's eyes. Furniture, financed, but the payments came from charity funds. And clothing. The quarter zip you're wearing cost $140. It was purchased on October 12th with funds from a GoFundMe campaign that told the world I was dying of cancer. Craig's jaw worked. There's been a misunderstanding. We can work this out. No misunderstanding. I turned to the blue tab. The forged power of attorney from the credit union. This is the document you filed at Millfield Credit Union 18 months ago, granting yourself authority over my financial accounts. The signature is forged. The notary stamp is fabricated. Using this document, you opened 3 credit cards in my Social Security number, with a combined limit of $45,000. I held up the credit card statements. $31,000 in charges. Routed to your apartment. I never saw a bill. Whatever you have there is out of context, Craig said. His voice had shifted. Harder now. He knew. The word context applied to documents he hadn't been shown yet, to evidence he shouldn't have known the shape of. Either he'd been served notice of the subpoena, or someone had warned him. Either way, Craig had been preparing for this room. I haven't shown you most of what I have yet. Craig's throat moved, a swallow he couldn't control. His eyes dropped to the binder for half a second before he pulled them back to my face. Everyone in that room saw it, the flinch of a man who'd just told on himself. The room was silent. Janet's tissue was shredded to nothing in her hands, her knuckles white against the armrests of her chair. I turned to the yellow tab. Tom Kessler's printouts. The text messages between Craig and Denise, time-stamped and annotated. These are text messages obtained by prosecutorial subpoena from your phone. March of this year. Craig to Denise, 11:47 p.m. I read it the way I'd read a passage to a class. Clear, unhurried, giving every word its weight. If he finds out, we say he started it himself and forgot. Who's going to believe a retired shop teacher over bank records? Janet made a sound, not a word. A sound from deep in her chest. June. Craig to Denise. I turned the page. Janet's the biggest target. She's got the retirement fund, and she loves Dad more than anyone. I'll do it in person. The crying works better face to face. Janet's hand went to her mouth, her body folded forward in the armchair, as if the words had physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders. August. Denise to Craig. The GoFundMe update needs more emotion. Write about his appetite. People respond to appetite loss. I'll edit before you post. I let the silence hold. 3 seconds. 5. The baseboard heater ticked. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down Maple Street. Craig stood up. You're doing this in front of the pastor. In front of Aunt Janet? His voice was louder now. This is a family matter, Dad. This isn't. You can't just sit down. He sat. Not because he wanted to, because 36 years of hearing that voice in that register moved his legs before his brain could argue. There's more, I said. I held up the browser history printout. Your phone contains searches for dementia defense criminal case. How to file a PS complaint, Ohio. Charity fraud, statute of limitations. All from months before I ever found the website. You built the defense before I knew there was something to defend against. Craig's hands were gripping his knees. His knuckles had gone the color of the binder's cover. I'm your son, Dad. His voice cracked. Your only son. Denise sat rigid on the sofa. Her face was white, drained of everything except calculation. Her eyes moved to the front window, where the sedan sat at the curb with its engine running, then back to the binder on my lap. She said nothing. Pastor Weaver leaned against the kitchen doorframe. His reading glasses swung on their cord. His lips were pressed into a line so tight they'd gone pale. I closed the binder. The sound of it, the covers meeting, the rings clicking into place, was the loudest thing in the room. I looked at Craig. My hands were flat on the binder's cover. My pulse was steady, 62 beats per minute. I could count them in my wrists, slow and even, the rhythm of a man who has finished his preparation and knows what comes next. Craig, you told this town I was dying. My voice was quiet, the classroom voice that meant real trouble. You told your aunt I had cancer. She gave you $28,000 of her retirement and cried while she wrote the check. I pointed through the kitchen doorway. The same doorway Pastor Weaver was standing in. Beyond it, the kitchen table with the faded sunflower wallpaper behind it. You sat at that table. You held her hand. You described chemotherapy I never had. You cried on cue while she liquidated savings she spent 30 years earning. Janet's sob filled the room. One sound, caught and held behind her hand, but it carried the weight of $28,000 and every lie Craig had fed her at that kitchen table. You used my name, my face, my signature. You stole from people who loved me. You stole from church members who put envelopes in the collection plate because their pastor told them It would help me survive. I looked at Pastor Weaver. He closed his eyes. You filed a report with Adult Protective Services claiming I have dementia, so that when anyone found out, no one would believe me. My own sister didn't believe me. Janet was crying without sound now. Her shoulders shook. Her palms were pressed flat against her face, fingers spread, as if she could hold herself together by force. You did this for 3 years. I held Craig's gaze. My jaw was set, the way it used to set before I fired a man, locked tight, every muscle in my face under control. You did it because you decided that 30 years of trust, every student, every church member, every neighbor who ever shook my hand, was inventory, and you sold it. Craig's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. The son who always had an answer. The son who'd talked his way through every dropped class and failed job and bounced check. The son who sat at his aunt's kitchen table and wept on command while she wrote a $28,000 check. That son had nothing. His pale blue eyes were flat and wide. Not the practiced warmth. Not the performed concern. Nothing behind them except the understanding that every exit was sealed. I'm not angry, Craig. I closed the binder on my lap. The white cover caught the gray daylight from the window. I'm finished. The word hung in the room. Nobody moved. The baseboard heater ticked twice into the silence. I stood. My knees held. My back held. Everything held. I walked to the front window. The sheer curtain was cool against my fingers as I pulled it aside. Tom Kessler was already on the front walk, 2 investigators behind him. Tom's shoulders filled the doorframe the way they'd filled the back row of my shop class 20 years ago. His boots were heavy on the porch steps, solid, deliberate, the opposite of Craig's weightless loafers. He was carrying a manila folder. Craig saw the county sedan through the glass, the investigators on the porch. His face went slack. The muscles releasing, the mask falling away. Everything beneath it exposed. Not remorse. Recognition. The same expression I'd seen in students who cheated on a final and watched me pull their identical papers from the stack. The moment they understood that the person they'd underestimated had been paying attention the whole time. I held his gaze. 1 second. 2. 3. The kitchen clock ticked above Janet's stove, counting each one. Father and son, separated by a white binder, and 36 years and $287,000 of stolen trust. Then I turned away. Tom knocked once. Janet's front door opened. He stepped into the living room, badge visible on his belt, the 2 investigators flanking him in the narrow hallway. Perry Zukowski, Tom said. His voice carried the clipped authority of a man who'd spent 18 years turning classroom discipline into courtroom precision. I'm Tom Kessler, Assistant County Prosecutor for Trumbull County. You're under arrest for theft by deception, identity fraud, forgery, and filing a false report with Adult Protective Services. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Craig sat on Janet's sofa, with his hands on his knees, and stared at the braided rug. His mouth moved, but no words came. His fingers curled into the fabric of his chinos, gripping and releasing, gripping and releasing. The hands of a man grasping for a script that no longer existed. The loafers without socks. The quarter-zip pullover. The silver watch catching the flat gray light from the window. Everything he'd bought with my name and my sister's retirement and a town's trust, arranged on a man who couldn't produce a single sentence in his own defense. Tom continued reading the rights. One of the investigators moved toward the sofa with handcuffs. Janet pressed her face into her hands. Pastor Weaver stepped back against the kitchen wall, his reading glasses swinging. Denise was already reaching for her phone, not looking at Craig, not reaching for his hand. Her thumb moved across the cracked screen with the speed of someone who'd been planning this call for weeks. She wasn't calling a lawyer for her husband. She was calling one for herself. They took Craig out through Janet's front door in handcuffs. I watched from the living room window. He didn't struggle, didn't speak. The investigators walked him down the concrete steps, one hand on each arm, and put him in the back of Tom's County sedan. The door closed with a sound that carried across Maple Street in the cold January air. Craig's face appeared in the rear window for 1 second. Pale, slack, the mouth that always had the right words hanging open with nothing behind it. And then the sedan pulled away from the curb and turned left toward the county seat. I stood at the window after the sedan disappeared. My hands hung at my sides. The house was quiet except for Janet crying in her armchair and the baseboard heater ticking. Something was wrong in my chest. Not pain, not relief. A hollowness, like a cavity in wood where the rot has been cut out, but nothing has grown back yet. I pressed my palm flat against the window glass. The cold moved through my hand and up my arm. Denise was still on the sofa, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in a voice so low I couldn't make out the words. One of the investigators stood in the hallway, waiting for her. "Mrs. Zukowski," he said, "we need you to come with us." Denise held up one finger. The investigator waited. She finished her call, dropped the phone into her purse, and stood. She didn't look at Janet, didn't look at Pastor Weaver, didn't look at me. She walked out with her chin up and her heels clicking on Janet's hardwood floor, as if she were leaving a restaurant where the service had been poor. The house went quiet. Janet sat in her armchair with her hands in her lap, the shredded tissue on the floor at her feet. Pastor Weaver stood in the kitchen doorway, his reading glasses still swinging on their cord, his face the color of old plaster. "Perry," he said, "I owe you an apology that words can't carry. You didn't know, Jim. I should have. I endorsed that fund from the pulpit. $5,000 from the discretionary account. I told my congregation to give. Craig spent 3 years building this. He fooled everyone." Pastor Weaver shook his head. He reached for the kitchen counter and gripped it. His knuckles went white. "Not everyone. He fooled me." And I gave him the microphone. I picked up the binder from the Lazy Boy. The white cover was warm, where my hands had held it through the confrontation. I tucked it under my arm. "Janet," I said. She looked up. Her eyes were dry now. No more tears. Something had changed in her face during the last 20 minutes. Something had closed, the way a door closes when the hinges have been taken off and reset. "I'm all right, Perry." Her voice was flat, controlled. "Go home. I need to sit here for a while." I drove back to the ranch house with the binder on the passenger seat. The sky was darkening. 4:30 in January, and the light was already gone. I parked in the driveway and sat with the engine off, looking at the garage where I'd spent 3 months building that case. The fluorescent light was off. The workshop was just a shape in the dark. I went inside, set the binder on the kitchen table next to Linda's fruit bowl, made coffee, and waited. The charges came down within 72 hours. Tom called me from his office each time a new one landed. Each call found me in the same place, standing at the workbench, hands flat on the maple, not working on anything. "Second-degree felony theft by deception," he said Tuesday morning. $287,000. That's the headline charge. 2 to 8 years. What else? 3 counts of identity fraud under ORC 2913. Pretty. 1 for each credit card he opened in your Social Security number. 7 counts of forgery. 3 years of IRS Form 990 filings. The power of attorney. 2 additional account applications. Dave traced at the Columbus Bank. And a notarized affidavit Craig submitted to the GoFundMe platform, verifying the charity's legitimacy. Each document a separate count. And the APS complaint, filing a false report with Adult Protective Services. Separate charge. His own text messages establish premeditation. If he finds out, we say he started it himself and forgot. That's not a confused son worried about his father. That's obstruction planned in advance. Federal charges? I've been on the phone with IRS criminal investigation since yesterday. The charity solicited donations across state lines through GoFundMe and PayPal. That's wire fraud under 18 UU, SCC 1343. Every interstate transaction is a separate count. Margaret Hoffman's $43,000 came from Akron, different county, potentially different federal district. They're interested. My hand tightened on the phone. The weight of the charges pressed down through the receiver and into my shoulder. I shifted my grip on the workbench. The maple was smooth and cold under my palm, the same surface I'd pressed into 100 times over the past 3 months. But this time, the pressure didn't help. The hollow feeling was still there. The State Attorney General's Charitable Trust Division moved the same week. They didn't need Tom's invitation. The Zukowski Heroes Fund's IRS filings triggered an independent review once the county prosecutor's case number entered the system. The fund was shut down. Assets frozen. Restitution proceedings initiated for every documented donor. Craig's apartment was searched on Wednesday. I wasn't there. Tom told me about it afterward, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee going cold between us. The warrant covered all electronics, financial records, and items purchased with traceable charity funds, Tom said. 2 investigators and a forensic tech. Took 4 hours. What did they find? Everything Dave predicted. The 65-inch television, receipt in a kitchen drawer, paid with a debit card linked to the charity's Columbus account. 2 laptops. A tablet. The furniture was financed, but monthly payments came from the same account. Closet full of clothes, with tags still on some of them. The Cancun trip. They found the resort confirmation email printed and stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet. Stuck to the refrigerator. Like a vacation souvenir. Next to a photo of him and Denise on the beach. My back teeth pressed together until the muscle in my cheek ached. A vacation photo on the refrigerator. Funded by Janet's retirement. By Margaret Hoffman's generosity. By Pat Keller's casserole money turned donation. Craig's personal accounts are frozen, Tom continued. Both the Columbus checking and a savings account Denise opened 6 months ago. Combined balance, $14,000. That's it. No investments. No property. No assets beyond what's in that apartment. And most of that was bought with stolen money. He spent nearly all of it, $240,000, through his personal accounts over 3 years, and he's sitting on $14,000. The rest went to lifestyle, restaurants, subscriptions, the car lease. He was living month to month on other people's sympathy. The $31,000 in credit card debt opened in my name was flagged as fraudulent that same week. Each card company conducted its own investigation. The forged power of attorney. The statements routed to Craig's address. The charges I never authorized. All 3 accounts were closed. The charges reversed. My credit report would be corrected across all 3 bureaus within 30 days. 3 years of damage. 30 days to undo. Karen Slattery published the following Friday. I bought the Gazette at the hardware store on Main Street. The newspaper sat in a wire rack by the register, folded so the masthead showed. Below the masthead, a headline in bold type 1 could read from 6 feet away, "Local man charged in fake cancer charity. Son stole $287K using father's name and photo." Craig's booking photo ran below the headline. Pale face. Flat eyes. The quarter-zip pullover visible above the frame border. I held the paper in both hands. The newsprint smelled of ink and cold air. my thumbs pressed into the margins hard enough to leave dents. Karen had included an interview with a woman named Helen Bradshaw, a name I didn't recognize, who'd given $1,200 after seeing the GoFundMe shared on Facebook. At the bottom, a note that Rita Hoffman's probate filing for her late mother Margaret's estate had been updated with documentation confirming the $43,000 in donations were solicited through fraud. The accidental tripwire that started everything closed with a footnote. Glenn, the hardware store owner, stood behind the register watching me. "Perry," he said. I had no idea. Nobody did. If I'd known, if anyone had thought to ask you, you would have asked. That's the thing. Nobody thought to ask because my son made sure they didn't need to. The Gazette's online edition went live the same morning. Karen told me later that the article received more traffic in 24 hours than any story she'd published in 6 years of running the paper. Within 48 hours, 19 donors filed formal complaints with the Trumbull County Prosecutor's Office. Each complaint documented a specific interaction with Craig, what he'd said, what they'd given, when. The file grew 3 inches thick in 2 days. I heard about each complaint from Tom. 19 names. 19 conversations Craig had fabricated about my dying. 19 checks, written by people who thought they were helping me survive. The backs of my hands ached from gripping things. The phone, the workbench edge, the steering wheel on the drive home from the hardware store. I couldn't stop gripping things. Pastor Weaver addressed his congregation the following Sunday. I sat in my usual pew, 3rd row left, the spot Linda and I had occupied for 30 years. The sanctuary was full. Every seat taken, people standing along the side aisles. Pastor Weaver stood at the pulpit with his reading glasses on and a single sheet of paper in his hands. His fingers shook. I could see it from the 3rd row. "I need to speak to you about a failure," he said. My failure. This church was used as a vehicle for fraud. Craig Zukowski sat in my office, described his father's suffering, and cried. I held his hands and prayed with him. Every word he spoke was a lie. He set the paper down and took off his glasses. "Starting today, this church will require independent verification for any charitable solicitation. No exceptions, no matter whose name is attached." I pressed my palms against my knees. The wood of the pew was smooth and warm from 30 years of Sunday mornings. My chest ached, not from hearing Craig's scheme laid bare in the place where he'd built it, from hearing Pastor Weaver's voice crack, from knowing that Craig hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen trust from a building where trust was the only currency that mattered. Linda's absence pressed into the empty space beside me on the pew. She should have been here. She should have been sitting where no one was sitting. Denise cut her deal 12 days after the arrest. Tom called me on a Wednesday evening. I was in the workshop, standing at the bench, not working on anything. Just standing there with my hands on the maple and the binder on the shelf behind me. I'd been doing that a lot, going to the workshop and standing there without picking up a plane. The space heater clicked on and off. The fluorescent lights buzzed. I stood. "Denise's attorney contacted us this morning," Tom said. "She wants to cooperate. Full testimony against Craig in exchange for reduced charges." "What's she offering?" "Everything. Access to the charity's social media accounts." She managed all of them. Login credentials for the GoFundMe, the PayPal, the website backend. She'll confirm she wrote the donation updates from June forward. She'll detail Craig's operational planning, the donor targeting strategy, the dementia defense timeline, the true crime podcast research that shaped their methodology. She'll testify to all of that in court, under oath. Her attorney wants the identity fraud charges dropped and the forgery charges reduced to complicity. She'd serve 12 to 18 months instead of 3 to 5 years. "Take the deal." Tom paused. "You're sure?" "She'll serve time." She'll testify. That's enough. Denise moved back to her parents' house in Toledo the following week. She packed 2 suitcases from the apartment. The investigators had already cataloged and tagged most of the furnishings as evidence, and drove north without filing for divorce. Tom told me Craig called 3 numbers from county lockup in the first 5 days after Karen's article went live. None picked up. By the second week, he stopped trying. Janet came to my house on a Sunday evening, 2 weeks after the arrest. I was in the workshop when I heard her knock. Standing at the bench again, hands idle, the binder on the shelf behind me. I'd been staring at the pegboard wall of planes, 48 of them, each one restored and sharp. I hadn't touched one in weeks. My hands had forgotten the rhythm. Or maybe they just didn't want to remember it yet. She stood on my porch in her winter coat with her hands in her pockets and her breath rising in the cold. "Can I come in?" I held the door open. She sat at the kitchen table, my side, facing the door, which she never did. I poured coffee, set it in front of her, sat down across the checkered placemat. Linda's fruit bowl sat between us the way it always did. "I can't talk to him again," she said. "I've thought about it every day since that room. Every day I see him at my table, holding my hand, describing the chemotherapy, the nausea, the weight loss." She picked up the coffee mug, but didn't drink. "He watched me cry, Perry. He watched me shake while I wrote that check, and he squeezed my hand tighter. I know. I don't want to forgive him. I know that's wrong. I know what the pastor would say. Jim Weaver stood in that room and watched the same thing you did. I don't think he'd say much." Janet set the mug down. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were dry. Whatever had broken in her at the confrontation had healed into something harder. "I'm closing that door," she said. "He's not my nephew anymore. He's the man who sat at my kitchen table and lied about his father dying while I gave him my retirement. I didn't argue, didn't offer comfort. Some doors close because they should." 3 weeks after Denise signed her cooperation agreement, Craig's public defender reviewed the evidence package Tom's office assembled. Dave Pulaski's forensic report, the text messages, the browser history, the APS social worker's evaluation, confirming my complete lucidity. The report Craig had triggered as a weapon, now filed as a prosecution exhibit, proving the dementia defense was calculated fraud. The forged IRS filings with my signature, analyzed by a handwriting expert. Denise's cooperation agreement. The defender called Tom on a Thursday. Craig would accept a plea on the state charges. The dementia defense, the strategy Craig had built from 400 episodes of true crime podcasts. The insurance policy he'd researched and planned and executed, collapsed the moment his own text messages were read into the record. If he finds out, we say he started it himself and forgot. His own words, his own phone, his own timestamp. Tom mentioned it in passing during one of his calls. Said it. The way he said most things, flat and factual. But something in his voice shifted. 2 true crime shows already covered the case in their weekly roundups, he said. A 3rd is developing a full episode. They're calling it the Millfield Charity Fraud. I set my coffee down on the workbench. The mug scraped against the maple. "The same podcasts," I said. "The same ones. 400 episodes he downloaded. 3 of them specifically about charity fraud. And now he's the subject." Tom paused. "The hosts are noting the irony. They don't even need to explain it." Something tightened across my shoulders, and then released. Not satisfaction. Something colder. The feeling of a circuit closing. Current flowing, where it was always going to flow, whether anyone wanted it to or not. Craig would hear about it eventually. Maybe someone in county lockup would mention it. The man who believed he was smarter than every criminal he'd ever listened to, cataloged and discussed on the same platforms he'd consumed while his mother was dying in the next room. The credit union called on a Tuesday afternoon. Phil Drucker's voice was careful, measured, carrying the weight of a man who'd processed forged documents for 18 months because the name on them was good enough. "Perry, I wanted you to know personally. The power of attorney has been voided. The fraudulent accounts are closed. Your credit report is being corrected. All 3 bureaus. We've implemented new identity verification protocols. It won't happen again." "I appreciate that, Phil. I'm sorry. I should have caught it. The signatures. I should have compared them more carefully." I turned my wedding ring on my finger. The gold was thin at the base. The same ring I'd worn when I signed the mortgage. The same ring Linda slid onto my hand 37 years ago. "You trusted his name," I said. "So did I." Phil was quiet for a moment. Then he thanked me and hung up. I set the phone on the workbench. The workshop was warm. The space heater's orange glow spread across the concrete floor. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. The pegboard wall of planes caught the light, 48 of them now, each one restored and sharp. The binder sat on the shelf next to the Stanley No. 5. White cover, black letters. Craig, 3 inches thick. Every tab aligned, every flag in place. The most thorough document I ever assembled. And the one I wished I'd never had to build. My phone buzzed. Tom Kessler's number. "Mr. Z, Tom. The plea deal went through this afternoon. 6 years on the state charges." I sat down on the shop stool. The metal seat was cold through my jeans. "Federal wire fraud is still pending," Tom said. "Could add time on top of that. The IRS investigators haven't finished mapping the interstate transactions." "Thank you, Tom. You gonna be all right?" "I'll be all right." I hung up, set the phone on the workbench next to the binder. The workshop was silent, except for the space heater's hum and the fluorescent light's 60-cycle buzz. I looked at the white spine with its black letters. Craig, 3 months of work. 3 inches of evidence. A closed case on the state side. Federal charges still coming. I reached for the Stanley No. 5 on the pegboard shelf. The steel was cold in my hand. The blade sharp, the tote smooth where I'd repaired it 3 months ago. I turned it over, set it on the bench. Tried to feel the thing I used to feel when I held a finished plane. The satisfaction of something broken made right. Nothing came. My hands sat on the bench on either side of the plane, and the workshop was quiet, and Linda's wedding portrait hung on the wall above me, and I realized I hadn't cried for her in 3 months. Not once. Not since the binder. I'd set her grief aside to build the case, and now the case was built, and the grief was still there, waiting in the same place I'd left it, patient and heavy and untouched. I looked up at her portrait, 28 years old, dark hair, brown eyes, the smile that started slow. My hands started shaking. Hit like because it's not just a button, it's how my story reaches the men who need to hear it. Would you have done the same thing in my place? Be honest. 3 months after Craig's sentencing, I sat in my workshop on a February evening with the space heater humming at my feet and the fluorescent light casting its familiar shadows across the workbench. The binder labeled Craig was on the shelf behind me, closed. It had been closed since the day the judge read the plea agreement into the record. 6 years on the state charges. Federal wire fraud still pending. I hadn't opened it since. My body kept its own accounting of what those 4 months had cost. 15 pounds I hadn't carried since my 20s. Gone from a frame that couldn't spare them. The mirror showed gray from temples to crown now. Phil Drucker's eyes had lingered a beat too long when I walked into the credit union last week. 3 weeks of insomnia that left bruises under my eyes no amount of sleep could erase. I aged more building that case than I had in 2 years of grief. The investigation ate through me the way Linda's cancer ate through her, from the inside, where you can't see the damage until it's done. I looked up at Linda's portrait above the workbench. 28 years old, dark hair, brown eyes. You wouldn't have wanted this to eat me alive, I said. It almost did. I'd do it again. Every printed page. Every late night in the cold garage with numb fingers and neon post-it flags. Every hour spent building a case instead of mourning my wife. I'd do it again because Craig would have kept going. More donors, more forged signatures, more families handing over retirement savings to a man who stuck vacation photos on his refrigerator with magnets. But something sat in my chest that wouldn't clear. A tightness behind the sternum, like sawdust packed into a space too small for it. Not regret, not anger. Just the residue of a thing that had to be done and took more than it should have. The garden had gone untouched through autumn and into winter. The vegetable beds sat under frost, stakes still standing from last year's tomatoes. 4 months of grief I'd set aside to build the binder, and the grief was patient. It waited. It was still waiting. I picked up the 1918 Sargent I'd found at a flea market in Youngstown 2 weeks ago. Cracked tote, rusted blade. The sole pitted, but not warped. Fixable. I'd spent 6 evenings restoring it, grinding the rust, repairing the tote with epoxy and walnut dust, flattening the sole on a granite plate. The blade took an edge like it had been waiting 80 years for someone to care. I hung it on the pegboard. 49. The count mattered. Not because I kept score, but because the count continued. Craig hadn't stopped anything. The planes still came in broken. They still went up on the wall restored. The thing I did, finding what's damaged and making it cut true, that hadn't changed. The one thing I couldn't fix was my own son, but the rest of it held. Janet's restitution came through in late January. Craig's frozen accounts held $14,000, and the court seized what it could from his apartment. The television, the laptops, furniture bought with charity funds. After liquidation, the total restitution pool came to roughly $26,000. Distributed across 19 donor claims proportional to their losses, Janet received about $2,500, a fraction of what she'd given. Not enough to undo the damage. But Janet cashed the check and put it back in her retirement account, and didn't say Craig's name when she told me about it. We started having dinner together on Thursdays. Janet's kitchen, the bungalow on Maple Street, the same table where Craig had held her hand and described my chemotherapy schedule while she wept. The first Thursday, Janet set 2 places at the table and stood there looking at the chairs as if deciding whether to sit. "This table," she said. "I know. I thought about getting rid of it, hauling it to the curb." "Did you?" "No." She pulled out her chair and sat down. "He doesn't get to take my kitchen table, too." We ate pot roast. We talked about the weather, about the church roof fund, about whether the hardware store was going to survive another year. We didn't talk about Craig. We didn't need to. The silence around his name was its own kind of conversation. 2 siblings who'd survived the same wound and decided to heal in the same room, at the same table, every Thursday at 6. Pastor Weaver called me into his office after service in early February. The fellowship hall had new signage on the bulletin board, a printed notice requiring independent verification for all charitable solicitations, with a phone number for the church's newly formed Financial Oversight Committee. 3 deacons and a retired CPA from the congregation. No more collection envelopes for causes endorsed from the pulpit without documentation. "I should have done this years ago," Pastor Weaver said. He sat behind his desk with his reading glasses on and his hands folded. "Not because of Craig, because it's what responsible stewardship looks like. You trusted people, Jim. That's not a flaw. It is when it costs my congregation $287,000. It cost them $5,000 from the discretionary fund. The rest they gave on their own. I paused. That doesn't make it easier. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I told them Perry Zukowski needed help. I used your name from my pulpit. That's on me. And now you've fixed it. He looked at me for a long moment. Have I? You've made sure it can't happen the same way twice. That's what fixing looks like. The credit union sent me a letter in January. New identity verification protocols. Power of attorney documents now required in-person signature verification with 2 forms of ID and live notary confirmation. No exceptions. No processing based on family name or account history. Phil Drucker signed the letter himself. Below his signature, a handwritten note. We won't let this happen again. My routine came back in pieces. Church every Sunday. 3rd pew left. Linda's spot stayed empty beside me, but the emptiness changed. It stopped pressing against my ribs. It sat there the way an old scar sits. Present, noticeable, part of the landscape. The vegetable garden got its first turning in March, my boot on the spade, the soil dark and cold and ready. I planted early peas along the south fence and covered them with row cloth against the frost. The workshop filled with sawdust again, instead of paper. I sharpened blades. I flattened soles. I ordered a replacement frog for a Stanley No. 3. I'd been putting off for months. My hands remembered the rhythm. Steel on stone, the circular motion, the sound of an edge coming back to life. I started volunteering at Millfield High 1 morning a week. The new shop teacher, a young man named Marcus Bell, who'd come over from a vocational program in Warren, needed help with the equipment. The bandsaw's fence was out of alignment. The drill press chuck wobbled. The dust collection system hadn't been cleaned in 2 years. Mr. Zukowski, Marcus said the first morning I showed up, I've heard about you from half the town. Call me Perry, and don't believe all of it. The good parts or the bad parts? The good parts are exaggerated. The bad parts are recent. He laughed. Good kid. Ernest didn't know a rabbit plane from a block plane, but he wanted to learn. That counted for more than expertise. The second week, I brought 3 of my own planes from the workshop as teaching examples, including the Stanley No. 5. A sophomore named Ellie Gunderson stopped at the pegboard where I'd hung them. She was short, dark-haired, hands already calloused from something. Maybe farm work, maybe just life. She stood in front of the No. 5 without touching it. What are these? She asked. Hand planes. Woodworking tools. This one's from 1942. Can I hold it? I lifted the No. 5 from its hooks and placed it in her hands. She gripped it the way I'd taught 1,000 students. 1 hand on the tote, 1 on the knob, elbows close to her body. Feel that balance, I said. They quit making them like this. She turned it over, ran her thumb along the sole the way I did, checking for flatness by instinct, not instruction. Her grip was steady, natural, the kind of hands that learn by doing, not by reading. It's heavy, she said, but it doesn't feel heavy. It feels like it knows where to go. I watched her hold the plane that had grounded me through 3 months of investigation. The same steel I'd gripped when my hands shook with rage. The same tote I'd repaired the week Rita Hoffman called. Now it sat in a 15-year-old girl's hands, and she held it like it mattered. You want to learn how to use it? I asked. Can I? Thursday after school. Bring a piece of scrap wood. She grinned. Set the plane back on its hooks with care. Walked back to her workstation. I stood at the pegboard for a moment, my hand resting on the hook where the No. 5 hung. Tom Kessler, Dave Pulaski, Karen Slattery. 30 years of students who showed up when it counted. The teaching outlasted the fraud. It would outlast me, too. If I'd frozen my credit the day Linda died, Craig would never have opened those cards in my name. If I'd locked my social security number with all 3 bureaus, the cleanup wouldn't have taken months. I learned that too late. But the thing that saved me wasn't paperwork. It was people. I taught them in a workshop with hand planes and table saws, and 20 years later, they showed up with subpoenas and forensic reports and a front-page story. A man doesn't build that kind of network on purpose. He builds it by giving a damn about the kid in the back row who can't figure out which end of the chisel to hold. One day, that kid picks up the phone and says, "Mr. Z, I've been waiting 20 years to pay you back." A Saturday morning in early spring. I sat on the front porch with coffee, both hands wrapped around the mug, the ceramic warm against my palms. The frost was melting off the lawn in patches, white retreating into green, the grass underneath pale but alive. The oak at the corner of the lot had buds on its branches. Small, tight, not ready yet. But there, the air smelled of thawed earth and last year's mulch, the first real smell of the ground waking up. The vegetable garden was visible from the porch steps. The turned soil sat in dark rows, the early pea shoots pushing through the row cloth in thin green lines. The south fence caught the morning sun first. I'd known that for 30 years, planted there every spring, watched Linda's tomatoes climb the stakes every summer. The garden needed more work. Compost, mulch, the raised beds wanted new cedar boards. But the soil was ready, and the peas were growing, and the sun was warm enough to sit in without a jacket for the first time since October. Behind me, the garage workshop was lit and warm. Tools organized on the pegboard, 49 planes catching the fluorescent light, each one cleaned and sharp and catalogued. The binder sat on its shelf, white cover, black letters, closed. It would stay there. Not hidden, not displayed, just finished. My phone buzzed on the porch railing. I picked it up. A text from Tom Kessler. "Morning, Mr. Z. Karen's kid wants to take shop next year. Thought you'd want to know." Something loosened in my chest. The tightness that had lived behind my sternum for months. The sawdust that wouldn't clear. Not gone, but lighter, enough to breathe around. I smiled. The first one that came without effort, without deciding to. It arrived the way thaw arrives. Not all at once, but in degrees, until one morning the frost is gone and you don't remember exactly when it left. I set the phone on the railing, picked up my coffee with both hands. The steam rose in the spring air and disappeared against the pale blue sky. The silence in the house behind me was the same silence that had followed me since Linda died. Same rooms, same empty chair at the kitchen table, same absence in the space beside me every Sunday morning. But somewhere between the binder and the garden and the sophomore holding the Stanley, no. 5. The silence had changed. It didn't press anymore. It didn't ache. For the first time in 2 years, it was just quiet. And quiet was enough. That's how it ended for me. But I know some of you are still in the middle of your own story. Tell me about it in the comments, because a father's story should never go unheard. Share this with the man who needs it most.